Welcome to the Dev Launch Podcast, where we bring you inspiring stories of the tech industry's rising stars, corporate America employees turned tech entrepreneurs. Hear how these folks took a risk in leaving their W-2 job to build their enterprise, the lessons they've learned along the way, and what they're doing to revolutionize this industry, one project at a time. Our guest today is Michael Harris, the founder and owner of Bamboo Software. Headquartered on the east side of Cleveland, Ohio, they specialize in serving healthcare and medtech companies as certified cloud and healthcare interoperability professionals. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for joining on this show. As you know, the purpose of our show is we're really trying to highlight stories like yours of folks who at one point were working in a W-2 job in corporate America and ended up leaving to launch their tech entrepreneurship, their tech entrepreneurship journey, starting a business in the tech space. And you are a prime example of that with Bamboo Software. So I'm excited to get a little bit into your story and kind of how you got to where you are today. So would you mind maybe bringing us all the way back? Call it your origin story. Talk to us a little bit about even your childhood. Like, how did the years in your childhood kind of shape your experience specifically in entrepreneurship?
Well, I guess we were always active. I mean, even from I can't remember exactly how old I was at the time, but we were as young as you could possibly be to get a paper route in the city of Canton. So my older brother, who's about a year and a half older than me, he was the one who's officially, managing the paper route. And he may have been like 11 or 12 years old. It's kind of crazy, how young you could be for that. And then I'm his helper, his helpful sidekick, the Robin to Batman kind of thing. So we did that for at least a year. It seemed like a lot longer at the time, but it was probably 2 years with him at the helm. And then he graduated on, started, doing roofing and things like that, because he was a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger. I continued and then brought on my younger brother, who's about 2 years younger. Along the way, we would meet different people who needed different things. So for a time, we were doing lawn mowing at a couple different locations as well. And that's pretty much it. It just kind of fell into our laps. We didn't think anything of it. We thought it was kind of normal, but we're 10, 11, 12 years old with checking accounts, filing taxes and whatever else. So it's kind of crazy.
That's wild. And at the young age of 10, 11, 12, like you guys are doing all this stuff. Like I'm thinking to myself as a 10 or 11-year-old, like I was probably just like playing video games. So that's really
a lot too, for sure. Yeah.
So you played video games, but then you guys also had a business on the side.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it teaches you a different level of responsibility that I don't think we appreciated at the time, and maybe detested at the time. Especially in the form of, well, if you're delivering papers, usually, especially on the weekends, you got to get them out early in the morning. Sundays in particular, especially because now we're going to church maybe at 8:30 or 9 o'clock. So you got to get them done before church. Even worse part about Sunday papers are they usually come with these massive inserts, and they could be multiple inserts of advertisements that you got to stick in the paper. So we'd have some kind of a system set up in the morning, where we go out there bright and early, it's still dark out, get the inserts in, get everything ready to go, and then get out and deliver, these massive papers. And then finally, okay, we're done. We come back in, eat as much Cinnamon Toast Crunch as we could. And it's always a race with three brothers who gets the third bowl out of the box, kind of thing. And that's pretty much it. Yeah.
That's so awesome. It's funny. I think we've talked about this before, but like there's a lot of similarities because you got two brothers. I've got two brothers, although I was the youngest. So I feel like you probably had a little bit of a better situation in the lineup. But man, I got to imagine, the paper route, like you said, waking up early probably taught you guys a lot about responsibility at an early age, right?
And we're doing it every day, as soon as we get home from school too. You get home from school, you deliver papers, now you can play or do homework or whatever else is there. But that first thing, I assume it's probably similar to kids who grow up with a dog for which they're largely responsible. You know, you
Mm,
could push it off onto the parents, but if the parents do a good job of enforcing that responsibility of you got to feed the dog, you got to take the dog for a walk, you know, etc. I would think it's probably similar in that.
mm.
Just usually don't get paid for taking care of your own dog. So
Yeah, that's true. I mean, unless you get like some type of allowance or something like that. But
right.
yeah, you're absolutely right. And so like if we now fast forward, right? So you guys had that kind of maybe more of a formative experience with the paper route and kind of doing your own thing. You're filing your own taxes as a 10, 11-year-old. Now, fast forward a little bit to that first career out of college. Like, where did you start your career journey?
Well, I was lost even outside of when I was getting ready to graduate undergrad. I knew I wanted to get into finance, and I knew that I needed to do something other than the University of Akron, which is where I went. It was a great school, but it's not a feeder into Chicago or New York, you know. So I was like, well, this is the time to go to grad school, and I need to get out of the state in order to do that. So naturally, I went to France.
Wait. Naturally.
There's a business school in France, and it seemed like the perfect opportunity to do this as a 22-year-old. You know, no strings holding me back.
Hmm.
Now it's time to go. It was a great opportunity, a great experience. Met a lot of cool people. You know, gradually learned the language, and it actually did work out. That finally was the kind of catalyst to get me into finance a little bit.
Hmm.
So the first job out then from there, after doing a few internships, was as they call it marketing. You're sitting on the trading floor of an investment bank and you're largely building PowerPoints and some Excel back tests and things like that. But it was fairly qualitative for structured products. Was the ultimate thing that we were selling. Some people call them exotic derivatives. It's multiple asset classes. You know, you're dealing with stocks, options, volatility, even as an asset class, bonds, commodities, etc. So really interesting and intellectually challenging from that perspective. And as the marketing, all we're doing roughly is trying to distill these complex products down into narratives that make sense to institutional buyers.
Hmm.
So I learned a lot from the perspective of even how to build a story,
Hmm.
how to present things cleanly, you know, visually. I'm by no means a designer, but at least I think make it so that it doesn't stress people out when they look at it and they don't even know why, you know, kind of thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
Get into that, but that's a whole nother conversation, probably.
Well, yeah, and I gotta imagine like having that as one of your first career experiences to take something that can be a very technical and kind of heady topic. I mean, exotic derivatives. I barely know what that is, and I was a finance major in college. But to be able to take something that's that complex, and then as your job have it be something where you have to boil it down to its essence, like that's going to be really valuable career experience.
It was a lot of fun. That was the most fun part of the job as well to really because you could kind of nerd out on it and see, okay, how short can I make this phrase or sentence to describe this one little feature of this product, you know, or um, how few bullet points can I make to get the gist across, or what is the perfect diagram or image of historical performance that accentuates what I'm trying to present about it. So there's a lot of gamification, a lot of editing. I think that
Mhm.
that you could get into on that, which
Yeah.
I got into.
So it was it in this juncture of your career, the very first time, you're in investment banking, was it at this point that you started to feel that spark of entrepreneurship, or was that still relatively dormant? Were you still pretty like,
Yeah,
I'm
I was
locked
feeling
in?
a spark there, but then I quickly realized, well, there's nowhere to go from here though, because what am
Mm,
I going to be, a PowerPoint guru? I mean, there are
mm,
some that do that, but it's more from a corporate messaging maybe side of things as well. And there's some really good people that do that, but it didn't seem like it was a very what's the word I'm looking for, obvious path, at least
mm,
from for an entrepreneurial path to take. especially then if I'm still going to be focused on finance, because it's like, well, okay, so do I do this? Are banks my clients? That feels weird because they have full-time people. Why would they hire me? That
Mm-hmm.
makes no sense, you know. So I didn't see how that would work out in an obvious sense.
So did you see this just as like a stepping stone then towards the next thing? Or were you kind of like, I'm just in investment banking until something else comes up?
I really didn't know what I was getting into. I think even when I, started it out, I knew I wanted to be in derivatives and in structured products in some capacity. And so even when I was then beginning to reevaluate, the career path that I was on and seeing that there's not a whole lot of vertical room that I would have, from the marketing direction, the first natural place to look would be, well, maybe I move into structuring or trading. Um, and that could work. Some people have made them move, though usually for marketing, they would go into sales, and I'm not a sales guy at
Mhm.
all. So that seemed like, well, that also doesn't make sense for me. Likewise, there's always room in that particular role to do stuff around automation, at least within the team. And so whenever we had opportunities to do that, I jumped on it. And so then I'm working primarily in VBA, which is a horrible language and environment for programming, but it's still programming and it was still a lot of fun.
Mhm.
So that kind of, made me realize that, oh yeah, that's right. I used to kind of be into this when I was a kid,
Mhm.
and I'm getting into the zone when I'm doing this.
Mm.
Maybe there's something there. And then the longer I looked into it from a career perspective, the more sense it made that this is the path that I need to, pivot into.
That's so interesting. So it was almost like even in investment banking is when you kind of had that like aha moment that maybe software development or that track is a better fit long term for me.
Yeah, because I went into investment banking, obviously, like a lot of kids go into, for the same reason a lot of kids go into it, is like, well, I think there's a lot of money there and I want to make a lot of money, and
Mhm.
and also have an intellectual, challenge kind of thing,
Hmm.
especially from the mathematical side of things.
Hmm.
But then that was it was really kind of over by the time I got there. I mean, there's still a lot of opportunities to make a lot of money, depending on where you're at in the field. But it wasn't just no matter where you were within the bank, whereas that was more the case before. Now bonuses are smaller, salaries are a little bit more stringent, and plus there was almost no path for me to make kind of an exponential growth in terms of income, in terms of wealth. Whereas with software development, again, that's something that is open to you, at least
Mhm.
theoretically.
Mhm.
You can build tools that are, infinitely scalable. You can participate as a key stakeholder in startups, and not to say that there's not room for a finance guy as well, but you need different skills from a finance guy, probably more from a sales perspective as well, at least in the sense of, well, I can get money. If you're the
Mhm.
money guy who can bring money to the startup, then you're extremely valuable. But if you're just like, I can manage money, well, yeah, a lot of people can manage money. It's
Mhm.
tricky. I hope I'm not stepping on what you do, because
No.
that's not what.
I think you're totally spot on. Like I think what you're hitting on is there's a scalability factor that comes with software that just isn't it's not that it's not available in other categories or other areas, but it's unique to software for sure. I think you're
Yeah,
absolutely right.
yeah. So
Yeah.
that really attracted me, and then there's the meritocratic aspect of it as well, which is if you're a good developer, you have the chance to really shine. I think
Hmm.
that really speaks to me. I think.
Yeah. And now you were only in investment banking. You were there for a few years, but then you had a couple other career kind of stepping stones before you started Bamboo, right?
Yep.
You want
Yeah.
to talk
So
us
I
through
was in,
that?
I was in the marketing role for about 4 years. Um, then switched. Well, finally, then I was able to get a great mentor within the bank who was able to introduce me to some key people. I worked my way down the chain, and then basically learned even things that I didn't know that I needed to know in order to make a transition to software development as a professional. I knew I could teach myself how to code, but well, even what language should I do if I want to continue
Mm.
with the job within this bank, which I already have a reputation built up. I should try to be able to transition internally. I know the industry, so I should try to work within the industry. I know it pays well, so that's a good point as well. Um, where do I even start? And so I spoke to some people, and they were giving me even the fundamentals, things that blew my mind when they said it. They're like, well, test-driven development. So you write a test and you hope that it fails. And I was like, well, that doesn't make sense, because I would think I'd want it to pass. And so just getting those basic concepts in, it kind of directed my learning in those early months, I suppose. So then just spent, nights and weekends, a couple hours here, a couple hours there, learning as much as I could, watch a lot of Pluralsight videos, read a lot of 1,500-page books. And then in 6 months, I think I was ready to transition internally. We did that, stayed within the same company, moved to a different team. Now I'm a full-time software dev, and I'm freaking out a couple of weeks before, like, am I an imposter? Are they going to see through me and realize that I don't know what I'm talking about? But that wasn't the case. So we picked right up and started learning now even faster, because I'm doing it on a regular basis. So I stayed there for then that new role for about a year. I continued learning, spending my nights and weekends largely, to keep learning and try to see how fast I could ramp up in skills. I got to the point to where I thought, I think I need to surround myself with really good people and really good systems. We were kind of it was kind of like a hacking team in the bank on purpose. We were supporting a trading team directly. And so it's more about, well, how quickly can you get us some tools that just work? And so, okay, I get that. There's a need for that, but I wanted to learn proper software craftsmanship practices, and from really good developers. So I started to think, well, maybe in 6 months or a year, I'll have enough experience and I can reach out and try to do that. But then I was reached out to by a recruiter who was looking for somebody to go to a hedge fund. I looked into the hedge fund. They seemed pretty legit. They seemed like they had a lot of really, top-notch talent there. And so interviewed there a couple different times, 3 hours each time, 1 hour per person. I interviewed with one guy who got Forbes 30 under 30 the next year. One guy had a PhD in quantum computing. One guy was like a 25-year-old, but he graduated from Oxford in philosophy. So naturally, he's a software developer at a hedge fund. But he also, even prior to that, he was like the number 2 in a statewide math competition in the state of Florida, or something. Brilliant people. So I'm sitting there, and I've never felt dumber in my life. I thought, this is where I need to be. This is where I'm going to learn as fast as I can. Because early on, you need to learn those fundamentals, and you got to get them instilled early, or you're going to miss the boat, kind of thing. It's the same with kids, and I'm always freaking out. I got a 15-month-old, so I'm always like, he's getting spoiled. I can't let him get spoiled. And we're like, he's not even 4 yet. I think we have 4 to really drill that into him. But anyway, I'm going off on tangent.
No, that's really good. I think something that you had said, though, and I think this is worth highlighting in your journey towards where you are today. You were self-taught. And you also mentioned that experience of kind of that imposter syndrome, especially with that first full-time role. What was, really quick, what was the language that you started off with?
C#.
Okay.
So we started in C#. I wasn't sure if we were going to do Java or C#. I didn't know what the bank was doing. I knew that both were popular languages. So, that was one of the things that I got out of my initial interview. Like, yeah, do C#. Okay. So I tell people C# is my native language. And I love it. I think it's an awesome language. They're doing a lot of good stuff with it lately in the last couple of years too, with the later versions of .NET and the later versions of C#. So I'm excited to see that the community is continuing to improve things and make it better.
Well, and that was actually going to be my follow-up question, is because you mentioned the .NET, because C#, it goes like C# was like one of the first, well, not one of the first, it was at C, and then it was C# and then .NET. Is that right? Am I remembering that correctly?
.NET is a framework around C#, so they live together, but it's more like .NET is the libraries and things, and C# is the language itself.
Okay. That's right. Because that's then, further down the road, you ended up kind of, or right now even, you're kind of specializing more in the .NET space, which is not like every software developer is in that space, even though, what is it? Isn't Microsoft largely run
Yeah,
off of .NET? So
yeah, yeah. It's an interesting ecosystem. Where who I come across, it seems that most developers, especially self-taught developers, are JavaScript guys. JavaScript,
right.
maybe TypeScript, because they live together. Which I love TypeScript. It's close. I feel like it's the front end equivalent to C sharp. And C sharp aficionados are going to get mad at me for that. So no, you can do front end with C sharp. Yeah, I know, but let's be real.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So I see a lot of JavaScript because it's front end focused, and that's where most self-taught developers, I think, are from what I see, are in. We've gotten work just for being focused on .NET, which I always thought was strange because in my world where I started, everybody's using .NET. Institutions, I think,
Hmm.
are more .NET, C sharp people. Yeah, they're Java or C sharp, it seems like.
Yep.
But then outside of that, outside of institutions, that's where the JavaScript is at.
Yeah, that's super cool. So back to what you were saying though, as you were making this journey as a self-taught developer in particular, I think something else that you had said that was really worth kind of calling out, which was you just did it, right? Like I think I've seen so many, especially self-taught software developers, who because of imposter syndrome think the remedy is to just learn more. But
Hmm.
in your experience, you were like, yeah, I'm going to learn. I'm going to do a really, really good job learning this. But at the end of the day, I just have to do it. Like I have to routinely practice this as a full-time software developer. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to really create my foundation.
There's so much more to being a software developer than just writing good code. And that's what you learn actually on the job. It's like, hey, spin up a server. I did not learn that in my Pluralsight Intro to C Sharp courses. I have no idea what you're talking about here. Um, so yeah, so it's really important. But I got lucky in that sense too. I think just being able to make that transition internally um, was very helpful to that. If I didn't get that, I was still fully prepared to make it happen. So in that case, I was going to need to find a more official break in my career. And so to do that, I was just going to bite the bullet and sign up for a boot camp, go through the boot camp, get a job that way, trying to be the shining star student in the camp or whatever, and then get started professionally. I knew that once I got started professionally, I would be able to, grow from there. But it was just, can somebody trust me to do this, and then let's go, and I'll make you proud, kind
Mhm.
of
Yeah, which is great. And thank goodness you had that opportunity presented to you to be that full-time software developer. Also working with a team that was like leagues ahead of you, like really, really sharp
these
people.
guys were amazing. I've it's it was the dream job,
Hmm.
literally. I mean, it's something that I looked forward to in terms of work environment my entire life. Everybody is competent across the organization, even to the level of HR and onboarding. It was a well-oiled machine. It's
Hmm.
amazing, amazing. So from there all the way up, it's just everybody knew their job. Everybody did their job as exactly as they're supposed to.
Hmm.
Never had to worry about, is my job going to be impacted because somebody else didn't do theirs? No, they did theirs. So then on the flip side, your only worry is, crap, am I doing everything that I'm supposed to be doing? Because I know people are counting on me and they're expecting, not quite perfection, but at least the utmost of professionalism,
Hmm.
which is a great pressure to have, though, too. So it really forces you to kind of up your game as well.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
learned a lot of techniques from them, learned a lot of ways to actually break the rules even.
Hmm.
You learn these basic rules as as you're going through early software development
Hmm.
instruction. Um, solid principles and blah 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 and whatever. And yes, they're important, but the ultimate goal is, can you write software that brings value to business and that people can understand? Because ultimately,
Hmm.
the people are the expensive pieces of the puzzle. And so, if they can't understand your code, it's kind of worthless because now nobody else is going to be able to change it or maintain it. And so,
Hmm.
point.
This might be a bit of a callback, so I apologize for not prepping you for this already. But can you remember, like, is there a specific story you remember of like when you received feedback, especially on the code that you had written from some of these guys, that just stands out to you as like, oh, this was like a really helpful lesson on my software development journey?
Ooh. Um, Nothing really specific, though I did have some failures, I think, and we still have that as we go along. Again, in terms of the readability perspective in particular. So in my I stayed at the hedge fund for a year, real quick, before I moved back to Ohio. I miss Ohio, I miss family, and even from a foundational level as a person, I felt like it was really important for me to be close to family. Uh, and so why am I being a hypocrite by living apart? So anyway, but while I was there for that year, maybe about halfway through, I was working on a project, and there were some decisions that I made on it, trying to be, more agile and get the value out quicker. Corners were cut, and I'm thinking, I should probably do it differently, like this instead of that. But I didn't, and got to the end, and then look, it's fine, it worked, and I knew how to navigate the code in order to modify it and maintain it as necessary. But then right after I left, this is bad. You don't want to do this as a software developer. It's like the worst thing you can do. Right after I left, I reached out to the guys again, and they were teasing me about this particular piece of software. They're like, "Yeah, we tried to get in there, we couldn't figure it out, so we just kind of abandoned it." I was like, "Oh,
Oh
no, that's the
no.
worst I get." I've gotten other compliments, along the way where people are, coming into things that I built, and they're like, "It's perfect. I knew exactly where to go to maintain it. I
Mm,
didn't even have to think about it. It's
mm,
super easy. We're still using it today. It never breaks, blah, blah, blah." That's the good stuff. That's what you want to
mm.
hear. But you get both. Now you have the contrast, and it's like, okay, I want this one only and not that one. Get away from here.
Right.
I don't want to hear that again.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine that probably shapes a lot of your approach with bamboo.
Big time. Big time. And I tell the guys, whenever we're doing code reviews, if I'm reviewing them, if they're reviewing me, obviously accuracy needs to be there. If it's not correct, or then it's worthless. But right after that, which should usually be taken care of with a couple tests here and there, the very next step is, I don't know what you're doing here. Can you either explain it, and maybe I'm just dumb right now if it's 5 p.m., or maybe it's not clear and we can really simplify it and use some kind of a simpler approach. There's too many layers of indirection, or you're using an interface and you don't need an interface because it's a simple application. Let's just have a concrete class and
Mm.
run with it, kind of thing. That breaks, the rules, and like we talked about before. So different things like that. But we focus really heavily on, is our code easy to understand? Because
Mm.
that's what saves our clients money. Number
Mhm.
one, we're not going to be around forever. We're hired on by companies, and so when we leave, they need to have something that they feel good about, that they can use. I don't want to leave them with a pile of junk that they have to get rid of, because then, well, that's not going to be good for us long term. And anybody who's in business for, and seriously needs to be in it for the long term. We're creating
Mm.
relationships, we're building relationships. I'm going to get a lot more value out of past clients if they can refer me to other future clients than I am to just, slash and burn kind of thing
Mhm.
along the way. So it's a really important piece. And then there's the ethical part as well, which is an
Mm.
important part for me. We value integrity within the business, which includes writing clean and maintainable code, because it's the right thing to do, So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, and it reminds me too, it's like also maybe the third category would be like, if other software developers come in, they might not specialize in .NET. They might not specialize in, the
Yep.
specific languages that you guys specialize in. If you have a reputation of having really clean code and
Yep.
having it be really easy to pick up, they're going to refer when that's outside of their wheelhouse. They'll be like, I've got a great .NET developer. I
Exactly.
want to bring them on. So
Exactly.
that's another big part of clean code
Yep.
too.
Yep.
Yeah. So I want to better understand, and I'd like our listeners to better understand the pivot point. Right. So like I think as we've heard your story so far, it's really clear like you have always been on this trajectory. It's not like one day you woke up and you're like, I want to be a software developer. It's like, no, you had a lot of like little experiences that kind of edged you towards this. But I imagine there was a pivot point that ultimately launched you into starting Bamboo. And this was about maybe 3.5 years ago, maybe even 4 years ago. But can you bring us back to that time and talk to us about what that pivot was, what inspired it, and yeah, what ultimately caused the launch of Bamboo?
Do you mind if I step back a little bit further? Because
Yeah,
there's kind of two pivot points. I would say that's the mechanical pivot point. That's when the opportunity was concretely presented and we went with it. And you're not going to forget that question, so we'll leave it aside and you'll get back to it.
perfect.
The real pivot point, even for software development and Bamboo,
Hmm.
came 5 years before, well, 4 years before, really. And that was that they were always coinciding. It wasn't just software development. It was always software development and Bamboo. Not necessarily, I didn't have
Mhm.
Bamboo name yet, but
Mhm.
it was pretty close actually, even at that point. So there's a story Zig Ziglar tells it where, and there's other variations of it, but in this one, it's you plant a bamboo seed and you don't see anything for the first year. You see maybe a little tiny sprout, and then you water it. Next year you water it, nothing. Next year you water it, nothing. Next year you water it, nothing. Finally, on the fifth year, it shoots up, like X number of feet. I don't know, we'll exaggerate, say 60 feet in 6 weeks or something like that, And the reason it could do that is because it's been gradually planting its roots and developing a really solid foundation underground, which you can't see. But now that it has that, it can shoot up, and now it's a full-fledged, bamboo plant. So that was around the beginning of my epiphany to transition into software and to actually do it. That's where I got the 5 year even goal at that point. I thought, well, yeah, I think in 5 years I can develop enough expertise and enough experience if I really focus on getting good experience and continuing to build my knowledge in order to do something independently. At least as a freelance contractor, I should be able to do that. But then, so the real pivot point though at that time was I was helping my brother move, hanging out. So I was hanging out with him and hanging out with my dad, hanging out with their family. And this was at the tail end of a big gift of an introspection period that I was given in my life, which was at the age of 26. After about 9 years of living in New York initially and starting my career, I was diagnosed with leukemia. So from there, my world's flipped upside down. Moved back to Cleveland to get treatment. Stayed there for about a year. Bone marrow transplant. Everything went exactly as you would hope it to go, given the circumstances, which was great. Finally moved back to New York because I was like, I'm a man. I don't want to live in my mom's house. I got to get back into this. I need to be productive. Let's go. I don't think I was quite ready yet. I was still getting transfusions, like on like a weekly basis, but I was good enough. So let's go. So I get back to New York, and then now I'm really looking at things from a totally different perspective, because it's like, in the Middle Ages they used to have these things they carried around. They call them memento mori. So it means remember you will die, and it changes your perspective when you remember that you will die. I mean, we all have that. It's coming. It might be soon, it might be late, but it's going to happen. And so, are you going to sit around today, or are you going to do something that might matter a little bit? And so that began to greatly influence my decisions and my perspectives and my outlook. And what did I want to get out of this? Do I want to be a W-2 the whole time? There's reasons to do that. There's really good reasons to do that, even if you know that you're going to die, because you'd be working on some other project that isn't dependent on career, whether it be building a strong family. Then a W-2 is a great opportunity to give you some stability. I would argue that I have even more stability now, but that's there's different perspectives there.
Yeah.
But that was really the catalyst, being able to think through these things, get this perspective, and think, well, gosh, I have a second chance at life. What am I going to do with it? I should probably take a little bit more control over things, in a way. So anyway, so that's what started Bamboo, was that decision even to go into software. It was based around the idea that I want to start my own company. It should be software. I can live anywhere. I can work from home if I want, which means I have more contact with my children, which should be good for their development, which I didn't have any children at the time. Obviously, my oldest is, you know, a year and a half now. So all of this played into it. And so, yeah, so now going to your question. So it was about 4 years after that, and I had all these goals written down on my phone, and I would check them every now and then during walks that I would take, you know, at work for little breaks to clear my head and get some inspiration. The goal was 5 years to start something. So during the 4th year, I was planning, or I guess during the 5th year, prior to the end of the 5th year, I was planning to start dabbling in freelance platforms and things like that, you know, to see like, okay, can I do this, and how much money can I make with this, and can I actually make this jump and make it economically? Top Towel was one of them that was on my radar of, you know, places to join. But I didn't think I was making enough money where I was at. And I was like, well, this is stupid. I could probably make a lot more money, at least during the last year or 2 years or whatever. And so let's do that. So I'm looking around for jobs, and I'm reaching out to former managers, you know, for references. I reached out to my former boss at the hedge fund, and I said, hey, I'm looking for jobs. Can I use you as a reference? He says, yeah, of course, no problem. He said, by the way, I might have a line on 5 to 15 hours a week of freelance work if you're interested in that. Because I'm looking at these things and my goals all the time. It's like, well, that's even more what I'm looking for. So let's talk about this. So that turned into my first client. They are still a client of ours. They're one of our best clients, one of our they are our longest client. And yeah, that's all I can say about that. Well, so with that, then I started doing a little bit, you know, while I'm still working, obviously, nights and weekends and stuff like that, which is great because I'm still used to doing work like that. You know, at least, you know, whether I'm studying or now I'm getting paid for it. Then after a couple months doing that purely freelance, and I started to think, okay, when am I going to be ready to make this jump? So I had 2 goals. I said, well, I need to get on the Top Tile platform at least. It's a, you know, it's a competitive platform to get onto. So I thought if I get on it, I'll at least be able to get more work theoretically. That turned out to be true. So let me get on that, and I'll feel good. And let me see if I can talk to this client and say, if you can guarantee me 15 hours a week for 3 months at a low rate that I was charging at the time, that would be enough cash to replace my cash flow. Doesn't cover my taxes, but I was like, but it's temporary, and I knew that it would be temporary, but at least I can continue to pay my bills. That would be what I'd need, and then I'll make the leap and go from there.
Which I would be remiss if I didn't ask. One of the questions one of my listeners had asked me, he's like, can you get like the actual numbers? So what was your initial rate when you were starting out?
My initial rate with this company was $75 an hour.
That's pretty good.
It is pretty good, and I think it helped, and it was possible because I was coming in with the backing of this former manager from the hedge fund.
There you go.
So there's a lot of,
your network played a big role in helping you not only get the door open, but also get a pretty decent rate for a first time freelancer, I'd say.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was huge.
That's awesome. I'm sorry, I cut you off. You were in the middle of talking about how that. Okay, I think you were in the middle of talking about how that that first freelance contract was going. You got that at the $75 an hour rate. It was maybe a little bit less than what you were getting paid in your employment, but you saw it as the stepping stone that you needed.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's it. Yeah, I saw it as a stepping stone. That was enough to launch me, to make me feel comfortable enough to launch. And then, you know, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, and if this flops in 3 months, then I go get a job.
Yes.
I know I'm good. I know I'm good enough to get a job. Yes. So what's the worry? I have this huge floor, I think, in software development generally, and especially if you're decent, then there's absolutely nothing to worry about quitting your job temporarily and, you know, going off and doing your own thing. The only thing you have to worry about is, okay, is your cash covered? You know, and that's it. So once I had that covered, it's like, let's go. I'm doing this, you know.
Did you have a certain number of months? Like, did you have a goal? Like, I want to have 6 months expenses covered, or like, what was your runway, I guess?
I didn't have much of a runway because I just bought a duplex, and I was fixing that up, and I spent a lot of cash. I pretty much blew through my cash getting that up and running. So I'm living in one half, you know, 'cause I'm a single guy at the time, and then renting out the other, which I thought was a smart financial decision. I still think it was roughly smart, though I probably should have been a little more careful with the cash in that perspective.
Mm,
So I didn't have much of a runway at all, and so that's why it was important that I had that guarantee in the form of a contract, which would
mm,
still, I think, counts, you know, for a three
yeah.
month of a runway.
Yeah.
So if you ask me that, I'd say, yeah, 3 months. That's my runway.
That's great. I love that. 3 months. I've heard some people say, yeah, anywhere from 3 to 6 months is a really good runway for that first launch out, but that's
I
good.
would, yeah, because especially if you're only going to be a freelancer, which is probably how you should start anyway, you know, rather than trying to build up this entire business and you don't know what you're doing yet. Because you're a software developer, your runway can be much shorter because even in bad markets, and right now, apparently is a bad market for software developers. A guy I know, awesome developer, awesome .NET guy, was just laid off from his company. They were doing a big restructuring, getting rid of senior people. You know, he's an architect, .NET architect, really really good. And so he's freaking out, and he's reaching out. He's like, Mike, what should I do? Do you have any contacts? Can you introduce me to whatever? And I'm talking to him, and I'm like, I have no idea why you're so worried because you're going to have a job, at least one, probably three, lined up within 2 to 3 weeks.
Hmm.
But you don't know that, and that's kind
Hmm.
of funny to me, you know. But once you know that, then that's the key. Then you're like, well, I can do whatever then,
That's
because
right.
if it doesn't work, then I go back to here, and we're good to go, you know. And I mean, there's obviously a risk because if you're jumping around too much, you don't want to do that. But if you want to try something, everyone's going to look good, I think, too, in your resume if you sell it well. You'd be like,
Hmm.
well, I wanted to do this thing, so I tried this. I went off. I took a risk, and rah rah rah. We did that. I learned this, and this is where I'm at now. I realized, you know what? I do like the stability of a W-2, so I'm back.
Hmm.
I don't know, but
I
it's a
think
good.
it's such healthy perspective. That piece that you just shared where recognizing you could always go back to the W-2 job. I mean, that was kind of the aha moment for me as well. It's like if I really need to, I can always just go back. Like that's not an issue. But something.
My cousin is not a software developer, but he's always been uh, on the business side of things around software and from a consulting perspective, usually public sector even. And so he told me even recently, he said, "Man, once I got to the point in my career to where I wasn't worried about being fired, my career just went took off."
Mm,
Because now you can be honest, you can do the things that you know need done, and people find that honesty, if it's good honesty,
mm.
refreshing, very valuable,
Mhm.
etc. Go down the list. But anyway, sorry I interrupted you.
No, that's great. This morning actually, while I was on my bike ride, I was listening to Keith Ferrazzi. I can't remember his last name. Anyway, he wrote the book Never Eat Alone. It was recommended to me, so I'm listening to the audiobook. And one of the things he talks about, he was just talking about in the chapter I listened to today, was he's like, don't just network when you need something.
Yeah,
Be building your network all along. And I think what's really cool about your story is I think it really highlights that, right? Like you had that relationship with it was your investment banking manager, right? That was like your first kind of like
the
connection.
hedge fund. Yeah,
The hedge fund, yes, the hedge fund manager. So you were still like connected with him, networked with him. He was ultimately your first client,
yeah.
and it wasn't something where you were necessarily going out and like asking for it. It was just like you had your feelers out because you had your goals set out. I mean, this is like all the stuff that he talks about in his book, but I think it's a really great example where it's like I think sometimes the shortfall that some maybe more technical software developers that are great at their craft miss out on when it comes to launching their business is they think that they can do this without building their network or nurturing their network all along.
I have as soon as I moved back to Ohio, I reached out to two of my favorite professors. Even and we just started getting lunches every now and then. Just to kind of, can I say shoot the shit, or is that?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
This will be an explicit episode.
Yeah, and I don't think I got any business from any of that, but it's
Mhm.
yeah, you get practice talking to people,
Mhm.
even from a pure functional perspective. Even there's a lot of benefit. You get practice talking to people. You get practice. You learn things from other people when you talk to them that might be useful then down the road, or it might be interesting to other people that you're talking to who might be more directly beneficial for your business network and things like that. I recently got credit cards for my team, and for this exact purpose. I was like, guys, go to lunch, go to coffee,
Ooh,
take people out. I don't
wow.
care if they're prospects or not. Just I mean, they should be kind of tangentially related to the
Right.
business, but just go do it
Yeah.
because I don't even I'm not expecting even to get business from it, maybe ever, at least not now. But what I do need my team to be really good at is really good at talking because
Hmm.
we have a different, I think, ultra lean model that I'm trying to prove works. Where I don't want to have a middleman between my dev team and the client.
Hmm.
Want that communication to be as tight as possible, as frictionless as possible. In order for that to work, well, we need to be able to talk. And
Hmm.
I hire people with that perspective already. So if I don't feel like you can handle being a consultant rather than just a code monkey, it's not going to work out.
Hmm.
But if you even start from that perspective, well, now let's build those skills. And
Hmm.
so one of the ways to do that is just go to lunch with people and talk to strangers.
You know what? Honestly, you might be recreating or like developing the new venture of full stack developers. Before we're thinking about full stack
Mm,
developers in terms of like the full tech stack,
yeah,
maybe what we really need is a full stack developer that can also handle the sales engineering,
I like that.
you know what I mean? Maybe that's going to be maybe that's going to be the bamboo thing is the true full stack developer.
Truthful. I like that. This is pretty good. This is the best thing I got out of this talk the whole time.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, this actually brings up a really good segue. And there's just like so many more questions. I told you ahead of time. I'm like, we probably won't get through all the questions, but I did have one.
We could do it
Maybe
again. We could
I
do
mean, we could just do series number 2. This would be great. Let's make it happen. But maybe one like second to last question I will ask you, and it relates to sales and marketing because I think that's like the more conversations I have with software developers and software development agencies in particular, the more I realize how common of a pain point sales and marketing can be. Even for people who come in with a little bit of that marketing experience. I would say like you probably have even a little bit more of a leg up in that realm than even some of the other devs that I've talked with. But I would love to pick your brain because you've been doing this for the last a little over 3 years. You've been through the pandemic, and you guys are still going strong. Like didn't you just hire your third developer recently, somewhat recently, the last couple months,
Beginning of the year.
beginning of the year? Yeah. So like clearly, like you guys are doing something right. You're growing. You're going in the right direction. So what I wanted to have you share a little bit more about, if you feel comfortable with, is like talk to us about the practicals of the first few years, specifically in the building of the business and that tightrope walk of communicating a focused niche, but also not turning away good business.
That's the tricky part. That's the tricky part. I had something on my mind that I was going to say before. Oh, I'm terrible at sales. We talked about that before. I think anyway. I haven't really done it in bamboo though. I
Mhm.
mean, in a way, have kind of, but not really. Like I've never thought, okay, let me put on my sales hat and let me go make sales. It's
Mhm.
just things just kind of fell into place organically over time, which is something that you can rely on to an extent. um, you can also rely on to an extent only if you're doing good work and people are going to come back to you and keep using you. So usually we'll get connected with a client and we just kind of stick with them for a long time.
Mhm.
That's great. But then in the back of my mind, I'm always nervous because I'm like, well, but now we depend on them, and if they can decide to cut us off at any point for any reason, if that happens, I'm like, oh crap, well, what am I going to do?
Mhm.
So then a lot of my focus this entire year is geared toward this question of how can I build a sales machine? And of course, I approach it like an engineer rather than
Mhm.
a person to just go out. But I need to think of it like that. So part of
Mhm.
it is like, well, maybe less of a machine and more of like a farm, I guess. It
Mhm.
sounds a little bit more organic,
Oh,
a bit more.
yeah.
So
I think that's a good way of framing it.
you got to go out, you got to plant seeds, you got to cultivate the ground a little bit, maybe clear some trees and some brush, and stuff.
Mhm.
Um, you got to get your balance. You can't overemphasize one thing or another, and your ground's going to get barren real quick. So that's the slash and I guess the slash and burn, perspective or whatever. But yeah, so I'm trying to think of it in terms of that, and how can I build this ecosystem that kind of, sustains itself. When I was thinking about moving into software development, going way back, one of the things that I told myself was, I was like, okay, if I could always automate myself out of a job, I think I'll always have a job. That's pretty nice to think about, and that's what we were talking about earlier. Software developer, if you're good, you're fine. Like, don't worry about it. You'll be fine. But then, on the business side of things, I'm thinking now, okay, if I can always make sales, then I'll always have clients. Or if I can always get new clients, then I'll always have clients. And so that's the piece that we're working on right now.
Mm.
In order to do that, there's systems you need to have in place and stuff, and you need to get out talking to people. Obviously, there's not a lot of shortcuts there. You'll get presented with a lot of shortcuts if you have the word founder in your profile on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
And it always sounds interesting and enticing. It's like, yeah, it'd be great if I could just give you, $1, $2, $3, $4,000 a month, and you give me clients, guaranteed. But I haven't found that. I haven't. It hasn't made enough sense to bite the bullet on that, and I don't think it ever will.
Mm-hmm.
What I would love, and I think what a lot of software developers, especially with small agencies in my position, would love, is if somebody out there filled the gap in the market, which is somebody who provided actual value to us rather than lead gen. Can you provide me client gen? And put your money behind it. Stake your claim, saying that I know that I can give you clients. I know that clients that you get are so valuable that I'm willing to put some risk on the line in order to do that. What does that look like? Well, it looks like revenue sharing. If you do that, if you truly do that well enough, and if you can curate the agencies that you're working with, knowing that they're quality, knowing that they're not going to make you look bad when you send them clients, and if you get a decent enough, contract with them, which I think we're pretty generous in our referrals. So if anybody wants to refer something to us, we'll hook you up. Then you could build a pretty good business, again, from a farm perspective, because now, you just start sending clients to people and then collecting paychecks, because you know that you can give them value. So I'm looking for somebody to do that. And if they do, then here, take my money that you give me.
Right. And it's a low risk way of doing it. I think I'm so glad that you said what you said about, how many times we get messages, if you have founder in your title, you're going to get barraged by people all the time. I've experienced that myself. And it's totally that. It's like, you pay us, X number of thousands of dollars, and we guarantee you X number of booked appointments. And I'm like,
that was especially a big red flag to me as I'm less active now in development and in billing hours on a regular basis. I still do, a considerable amount, but not like, it wasn't my life, like, when I was on the freelancing side. But when I'm a freelancer and I'm getting approached by these people, like, I don't think you understand what you're trying to sell me, because you're guaranteeing that you're going to take away guaranteed income of mine, and you want me to pay you for that privilege. So now I'm not billing clients, and I'm paying you money to not bill my clients. And I don't know if the people you're sending me are actually going to be, come clients or not. And if they do, I don't know what I'm going to do with them. So I'm already fully booked. I need to think about, well, how can I build this machine of an agency rather than, just optimizing my own personal time. So yeah, anyway, we get into that.
That's really good. Well, I think one of my biggest takeaways, and I'm glad that you shared just openly and honestly about where you're at. You mentioned, 3 years in, it sounds like the number one successful mechanism of business growth has continued to be relationship creation.
Yeah, but I didn't finish that. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Yeah. Keep going.
So it's not just network, but it needs to be the tailored network. And so that's the second piece of, this year for Bamboo is we're trying to really, really aggressively focus in on a narrow niche, niche that's needed. So that's where kind of cloud and health tech are merging. And so we're getting into the networks, we're getting into the technologies, we're getting into the standards and things like that, trying to, get certifications and get additional knowledge where we find gaps. But it's already we've just started on it publicly this last month in July, and already there's significant traction. Just being able to say this is what we do, this is what we focus on. We're not custom software developers. It's like, okay, I can get on Upwork and find somebody to do that. It's a dime a dozen, less than that even. But if I'm looking for somebody who knows healthcare, who knows healthcare interoperability, who's certified in FHIR, for example, that's HIR for the listeners who don't know, then well, okay, then that's a huge leg up, because I'm not getting Joe Schmo who needs to learn all of that. I mean, he may be a great developer, but he needs to learn all that. I need somebody to hit the ground running, who knows the industry, who knows the quirks, who knows, whatever. Makes it much easier for me on the business side as well to tailor, your marketing, your outreach. Who are you even talking to? What events are you going to? Because all of these things cost money and it takes time, and so you might as well focus on one thing, at least start, in order to make your efforts as efficient and as effective as possible. So that's probably the biggest thing, maybe even more important than networking, because you can't really effectively do networking before you have the niche.
Oh, I love that you said that. Thank you for saying that. I'm going to emphasize and reiterate it. Networking is great. Targeted networking is so much better. And you're giving a great example of how clarifying your niche, clarifying your ICP can really serve to help your networking efforts. Right? Like, one of the things I always tell people whenever I hop on and they're like, so what do you do? I'm like, well, I'm a fractional CFO for software development agencies, for bootstrap tech organizations, right? Like, now that it goes from, oh, I know people who need finance, to, oh yeah, I know that one guy who's in my co-working space who's a software developer who's looking for a finance guy, right? Like, it's so much easier to make progress in your network.
Can I jump in there and flip the script and ask you a question?
Yeah.
You probably explained what you do on your own podcast a bit before, and I know we've talked about it at least a few months back, but I don't really remember exactly where that fits in. But I'm always curious because I mean, we interact on LinkedIn, and it's a great time. I think you're a great guy, but I don't I forget how that fits.
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing I love is working with software development agencies, in particular at the inflection point of growth, because it is really hard to manage your way from 500,000 to $1 million and do so without totally going bankrupt. There's this tightrope walk of adding capacity while adding revenue. You can't sell a bunch more contracts without capacity. You also can't add a bunch of capacity without properly planning your revenues. And so that tightrope walk is the financial forecasting, planning and forecasting that we do. Cash flow forecasting is another huge element of the service offering, where on a weekly basis, we're making sure that you have very clear visibility to the number of days you have until your bank account is forecasted to hit $0 for the first time. There's something that alleviates, or like opens you up to taking better calculated risks when you go from, I might run out of cash soon-ish, to, in 197 days, I will hit $0. Like, you get that type of clarity, you're going to take such better risks in your business that's going to help you guide your path towards the $1 million plus mark.
And so then that's dynamic, I imagine, as well. The forecast of days to zero.
That's right. Yep. And it changes. I mean, because the other thing that we do is we work directly with your sales pipeline, and we take a weighted average approach, or we take a weighted approach depending on where you are, where each of your prospects is in the stages of your sales pipeline, to give you a very realistic depiction of what we project your cash flows to be. Because it's not fair to just say, we're only going to look at what's contracted value. We want to also consider the fact that you have some stuff that's in pipeline.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. No, I can see that being pretty valuable.
Yeah. So I just doubling back on what you'd said though about networking, because I think that's something that we lose out on, especially for those who are listening who are more of a technical mindset, right? Like, you're brilliant in your craft. These are some areas that need to just grow and develop, which is, what are you doing to connect better with those maybe in your ideal client persona. But at the very least, like work on building that network, because you're a prime example, Michael, of how because you are well networked and because you have relationships, you have much more likelihood that eventually you're going to land, right in front of the right person at the right time. So I think that is a great example. So I know we're going over. Do you have a couple more minutes to wrap
Yeah,
things up?
that's good. Yeah, this is fun.
Perfect. Okay. Well, one of the last questions I want to ask, and I love to ask all my guests on the show, is I want you to talk for a moment to that probably software developer who's in corporate America right now. Either that person or maybe somebody else who just started their software development agency. And what I want you to do is I want you to just speak right to them and give them some words of wisdom from your experience, from the things you've learned. What, speaking to your younger self, what would you say to that person where they're at right now?
From what perspective?
It could be anything from, from your own experience that would help them, along wherever they are. Again, if you're talking to somebody in corporate America who's wanting to move into owning their own business at some point, tech business at some point, or somebody who just started out, think about the mistakes that you made, things that you had to learn the hard way that you would just give them words of wisdom on.
To early agency owners or freelancers who want to build an agency,
I think that's perfect. Yeah.
cash. Have cash ready to go, a lot of it, if
Mm-hmm.
you want to start expanding, because it takes a lot of cash to hire people. I think that caught me by surprise, especially if you're going through recruiters, which is usually the best approach and even will save you money in the long run. But they're charging 15 to 25% of the annual salary right away. A lot of money. You hire somebody for 100K and you're looking at a minimum, $15,000 cash that you need to be able to pay them. Plus, once you hire somebody, now they're a W-2 on your payroll and you have to pay them with cash. You can't pay them with a credit card. You can't pay them, with anything like that. You need cash. So it caught me off guard a little bit. Luckily, my wife works; she has a decent job, and we had some savings built up by then. And so for the first couple months after hiring my first employee, I surprised her by telling her that I'm not going to take any cash out of the business, any cash for the first couple months, because not only I was able to swallow the recruiter fee, with a credit card, but then the payroll was a big thing. It was like, oh, gosh, what if my clients pay late?
Mm-hmm.
That happens. You
Mm-hmm.
still need cash now.
Right.
Your employees. So what are you going to do? You can do things eventually, like try to secure a credit line in order to help you with that. But if you're new, good luck with that too. So
Mm-hmm.
so cash, build it
Yeah.
up and hold on to it for a minute. That's the new agency owners. The second thing, if you're a W-2 and you're thinking about, can I do this? Can I not do this? You're a software developer, man. Your floor is way up here.
Mm-hmm.
And once you do freelancing for 6 months, if you can get, a decent amount of work for 6 months, you can even you drop your rate down. You're charging $50 an hour and you're filling your time. You're going to be making decent money even still. But you'll be able to ratchet that up pretty quickly once you get some experience and get a couple projects knocked out as well. If you do that and you don't like it, or it flops for some reason, then you have this awesome experience and you can take it back and get another job, probably paying more money than you were making before, so there's not a lot of risk overall with that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a ton in my bank account. I never have. I spent too much money on college. So but you're able to survive that. I mean, it's yeah, that's the only thing I could say there is don't worry, you'll be fine.
That's so good. Yeah. Fear is probably one of the greatest inhibiting factors in keeping really brilliant people back from entrepreneurial ventures. So
Yep.
that is an excellent piece of advice, especially for corporate America folks. And then just as spot on was your advice on the cash. If you're going to be hiring that first person, like that's actually a big commitment. in
So
some
much
ways,
business I've realized is just cash management. And so
yeah,
if that's what you guys focus on, well, that's a lot of value right there.
100%. And it's so crazy that you're mentioning that, because it's like the more that I talk with people, the more that I'm serving my clients, the more I realize like cash in this space is like so important. You know, if you're a well-backed VC company, VC tech company, or VC backed tech company, you got a stockpile of cash, right? Because they just infuse you with millions of dollars, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
When you're bootstrapped, you're living each week. You need to be managing that cash flow. It's so important. So I'm glad that you mentioned the cash aspect, because you're absolutely right on. Michael, honestly, like I feel like we could probably go for another hour or 2 hours easily. This has been a great conversation. I think maybe the next time we have you on, I'd love to dive in further into like even more technical topics, and get more of your perspective on the industry, which I think we're going to have to do for sure the next time we have you on. But before we go, where can people go to connect with you or follow you? Like, where are you for socials and all that kind of stuff? Drop out your.
I'm technically on Twitter, but I'm not. So LinkedIn is really the only place where I have any kind of activity.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. LinkedIn, Berwin is my tag thing. So if you do the linkedin.com/in/Berwin, that's BURWIN, the family name.
Oh,
But you can Google me too, Michael Harris, bamboo.dev, or if you go to bamboo.dev, which is our website, then obviously go to the people section. We have LinkedIn links from there as well for myself and our team.
perfect. And I can tell everybody listening, Michael is an amazing guy to get to know, having a conversation with. I'm sure you guys will enjoy having a conversation with him as well. Well, Michael, again, I really want to say thank you for taking the time.
No, thanks, Ryan.
So, with all of that said, I also want to thank all of our listeners. If you all found value in our podcast episode today, please make sure to share it with your friends and subscribe for future episodes. Also, don't forget to leave us a review, because it will help other people find us and hear inspiring stories just like the one we heard today. And now, if you are a founder of a software development agency, or you know somebody who is, and you'd like to share something exciting that you are up to with our audience, please feel free to drop me a line at tony@equip.com. That's ACCQUIP.com.